I'm Kristen Gilger, a Senior Associate Dean here at the Cronkite School and Director of the National Center on Disability and Journalism. So welcome to the 7th Annual NCDJ Awards. We have, as 7th Annual implies, been recognizing the best disability reporting across the country and increasingly the world for the past 7 years. There are a lot of journalism contests. Journalists sort of like contests. So why does the Cronkite School do this one? And what makes this one special? To start, it's the only awards program devoted exclusively to reporting on disability issues and people with disabilities. Nearly 20% of the population of this country has some kind of disability, physical or hidden, and yet they are often ignored by the media or reported on in ways that are incomplete at best and insulting at worst. We believe that by pointing out what makes good disability reporting and offering other NCDJ services such as our style guide that helps journalists and communications professionals navigate language around disability, that we can encourage more and better reporting of this issue. So tonight you're going to hear from several of the winners of this year's contest who have done truly remarkable work. But first I want to say a word about a truly remarkable woman who makes this contest possible every year, Katherine Schneider. Katherine was supposed to be here tonight, but weather got in the way, and so she asked me to say something on her behalf. First, I want to tell you about her. She's a retired clinical psychologist who has been blind since birth. She is a writer and an advocate for all people with disabilities, and she established this contest in 2013. As I said, she had planned to be here tonight, but could not make it, and so she asked me to share her remarks, and I'm going to read them now. It's an exciting time for journalism with a disability angle. Next year, we'll celebrate 30 years of the Americans with Disability Act, with its goals of equal access for the 19% of us who live with disabilities to government, business, and employment. Have we achieved equal access? As the stories we honor tonight point out, not yet. Stories about abuse, neglect, and discrimination are not pleasant to read, but they make us aware of the realities of life for many and can rouse us to do something about these troubling realities. As Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Accurate journalism that goes beyond the latest cure for a disabling condition and beyond the narrative of a super crip overcoming a disability can push that arc toward justice. A story about the new disability emoji created this year, or Target's Braille Uno cards, or Barbies with disabilities, can make people realize that disability is a part of life, not something to be hidden, but also not the whole story. Journalism can highlight that more people with disabilities are pictured in movies and on television, more people with disabilities are running for office, and more companies and organizations see us as consumers. That's good journalism. The work of the NCDJ, like the Style Guide and these awards, is important work. I'm happy to report that the committee that picks the award winners tells me that their work gets harder every year. This year, they reviewed over 100 pieces of journalism from all over the world. I'd like to personally thank the judges for the awards, the NCDJ board, and especially Dean Gilger, for all of their hard work on this project. Please join me in celebrating good journalism about disability issues. That's from Katherine. Now I'm going to turn over the program to Amy Silverman, who will serve as moderator and MC for tonight. Amy is a great journalist in her own right. She's the former managing editor of the Phoenix New-Times. She's the author of a book about raising a child with Down syndrome. She has been a judge for this contest a number of times. She serves on the NCDJ advisory board. She is the mastermind behind initiatives in the Valley, such as the Barflies storytelling program, and she's an occasional instructor here at the Cronkite School. She's also a wonderful role model and a friend to me personally. Please welcome Amy Silverman.
Oh, I think you're my role model, Kristen. But I don't. How can I need the microphone lower than you needed it? I'll stand on my tiptoes. Hello. It's wonderful to see so many people here for this Must See Monday, and I want to tell you a little bit about the judging process for the NCDJ contest. And I'm going to go through it pretty quickly because Kristen says we got to get out of here by 8, and I want to talk about journalism. So let me tell you about the judging process. Contest entries are judged by professional journalists and experts on disability issues based on the following criteria: how well the piece explores and illuminates key legal or judicial issues regarding the treatment of people with disabilities. Entries must go beyond the ordinary in conveying the challenges experienced by people living with disabilities and strategies for meeting these challenges. Award-winning pieces will offer balanced accounts of key points of controversy in the field and provide useful information to the general public. Special consideration was given to entries that are accessible to those with disabilities. This year's judges in the large media market category were Tony Coelho, a former 6-term U.S. Congressman from California, and the primary sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Daniel Burke, CNN religion editor, Jerry Cepos, former newspaper executive and dean of the Manship School of Mass Communication at Louisiana State University, and myself. Judges in the small market media market category were Jennifer LaFleur, who is with us tonight. Jennifer, will you please stand? Jennifer is a data editor for American University Investigative Reporting Workshop and former senior editor for data journalism at Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. Thank you, Jennifer. Also with us is Leon Dash. Leon, would you stand, please? Leon is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who's a professor of journalism at the University of Illinois and former reporter for the Washington Post. A warm thank you to you as well. The final judge in the small media category was Susan Lo Tiempo, NCDJ Advisory Board member and former newspaper editor. And additionally, here from the NCDJ's Advisory Board is Becky Curran. Becky, would you please stand? Becky is the Disability Equality Index Program Manager at U.S. Business Leadership Network. She also serves as the president of the New York chapter of the Little People of America and owns and manages Disability in Media. Thank you to all of this year's judges. So now it's my pleasure to announce this year's Katherine Schneider Awards for Excellence in Reporting on Disability. Will Tom Jennings and Joaquin Sapien please come to the stage? First place in the large media market category and a $5,000 prize is awarded to Right to Fail, Living Apart, Coming Undone, written by Joaquin Sapien of ProPublica and Tom Jennings of PBS Frontline, who are here with us this evening. Right to Fail, Living Apart, Coming Undone is an in-depth investigation by ProPublica and PBS Frontline in collaboration with the New York Times. The series examined the efforts of New York City to let those with severe mental illnesses live on their own. Reporters obtained about 7,000 pages of records from hospitals, psychiatrists, social agencies, and housing programs to reveal how an ambitious housing program left many vulnerable residents in danger. In response to the investigation, a New York federal judge ordered expanded oversight of the housing program. One of the judges said, Living Apart, Coming Undone was an extraordinarily well-reported story about good intentions, moving mentally ill New Yorkers out of institutions into their own apartment, gone horribly wrong. The story and the photos made the human pain obvious. Please join me in congratulating Tom and Joaquin. I will now announce the second and third place winners in the large media category. The winners are not present tonight, so please hold your applause. Second place and $2,000 is awarded to Trapped, Abuse and Neglect in Private Care. The piece was entered by Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, WNYC-FM reporter and After Effect host Audrey Quinn's reporting revealed a history of abuse, neglect, and client deaths at facilities run by Bellwether Behavioral Health, the largest group home provider in the state of New Jersey. The award-winning episode showed how even as state after state cut ties with Bellwether, New Jersey, New Jersey continued to send nearly 400 of its most vulnerable citizens and $67 million a year in Medicaid to the troubled company. After the investigation, New Jersey ended its relationship with Bellwether. And third place in the large media market category and $1,000 is awarded to Unfit by Radiolab. Produced by Matt Kielty, Pat Walters, and Lulu Miller, the episodes explore how people with disabilities were targeted for sterilization during the early 20th century as a form of eugenic genocide. But laws permitting forced sterilization have quietly stayed on the books. While the language is now different, swapping terms like feeble-minded for mentally incapacitated, there are still 23 states that allow for a person with intellectual disabilities to be sterilized against their will if a court decides it is in their best interest. The podcast episode reached millions of listeners and hit the top 10 on the iTunes charts. Honorable mention in the large media market category and $500 is awarded to the parents said it was a special needs bed, the state said it was a cage, by Mary Jo Pitzl of the Arizona Republic, who is here tonight. Mary Jo, please come up. She's another one of my role model journalists in town. This story exposed the confusion and potential harm that happens when bureaucracies can't see past their rule books to understand the intricacies of the fragile populations they are charged to protect. Pitzl explored the Wadsacks ordeal to win approval for caregivers to use a specialty bed for their developmentally disabled daughter and how the interpretation of a rule took years to untangle. Let's give one more round of applause to all the winners in the large media category. Next, I'd like to announce the winners in the small media category. When I call your name, please come to the stage. First place in the small media market category and a $5,000 prize is awarded to You're Not Alone, a collaborative documentary between the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and Milwaukee PBS. The documentary was built on USA Today Network reporter Rory Linnane's Kids in Crisis series. Linnane was not able to attend this evening, but representing the piece is Mary Ann Lazarski, lead producer at Milwaukee PBS. Please come up. The documentary followed the lives of 4 young people from Wisconsin as they navigated mental health challenges. The film encourages young people to seek help for mental health challenges while calling for greater support from adults and health systems. One contest judge said, "You're Not Alone" was beautifully produced and stunning visually. Having the young people speak their truth in their own words was powerful. There is no doubt in my mind that the result of this work is living it up to its name, providing strength for those with disabilities and reassuring them that you are not alone. All right, now we're gonna, yes. Now I'm gonna announce the rest of the small media category winners. Second place and $2,000 is awarded to Hanna Raskin of the Post and Courier of Charleston, South Carolina for We Dined with Wheelchair Users at 4 of Charleston's top lunch spots. Here's what they experienced. Hanna could not be with us tonight. A food critic, Hanna said she had not really thought about the obstacles posed by physical barriers until a group of wheelchair users invited her to a meeting and talked about how they couldn't fully enjoy the city's celebrated food scene. Raskin proposed that the group visit 4 celebrated local restaurants at random while she documented their experiences. The end result was a piece highlighting numerous accessibility issues and a very good story idea, journalists who are in town. You could do that here. Restaurant owners were swift to respond, pledging to address the issues. Third place in the small media market category and $1,000 is awarded to Criminalizing Disability by Searchlight New Mexico reporter Ed Williams. Williams asked why so many of the state's special education students ended up in police custody. In collaboration with the local ABC News affiliate, Williams interviewed more than 300 parents, including the mother of Sebastian Montano, a smart, promising, but behaviorally challenged youngster who never received legally required services for his autism. The New Mexico State Legislature conducted hearings and directed the Legislative Education Study Committee to investigate. Honorable mention in the small media market category and $500 is awarded to Fighting for Personal Attendance at the Texas State Capitol by investigative reporter Edgar Walters of the Texas Tribune, who could not be with us tonight. When Walters learned that Texas lawmakers plan to spend $23 million on a negligible pay raise for personal attendance, $23 million on a negligible pay raise for personal attendance, he connected with advocate Susie Angel, a woman living with cerebral palsy. His piece explored Angel's quest for additional funding for her personal attendant, who allows her to live independently and has become a close friend. Let's give one more round of applause to all the winners in the small media category. Now we'll move to the next portion of the program, a discussion with the first place winners in both categories about their pieces, about how they approach reporting on disability. Would you all join me? So I think we should begin. Is this on? Can you hear me? Yep. You're all sick of my voice by now. Let's begin by talking about your individual projects. Marianne, why don't you tell us about yours first?
Well, as mentioned, our documentary was based on Rory Linnane's series that started actually at the USA Today Network Wisconsin. She reported on youth mental health in the state of Wisconsin about 3.5, 4 years ago. And then she eventually moved over to the Milwaukee Sentinel and continued her series. And one day called a colleague of mine, Scotty Myers, who was co-producer on the documentary, and said, would you like to produce a documentary on youth mental health? And of course, I know I've been following her series, and it was well researched and reported, and so we didn't hesitate saying yes. And so that's kind of how the partnership, this is our first partnership actually with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And I really am sad that Rory is not here because I do want to call attention to her fine reporting, which really was the basis for our documentary, and that's how that began.
And it's a truly stunning documentary on its own as well.
Well, thank you very much. You know, our goal was to reach other youth, other young people out there, and we really wanted this documentary to, you know, live a long time in terms of resource, and a resource in schools, a resource for therapists, a resource for teachers, parents, and young people themselves. And so we really had a lot of discussion among the production team on how we were going to achieve this and what we were going to do, and that really dictated our 30 minutes, because in classrooms, teachers don't have a lot of time, therapists don't have a lot of time in sessions, and so on. And so here we had 4 young individuals that Rory had met during her time of research and reporting, and thought they would be good, you know, subject matters, and they were willing to do it, and family members were supportive of them doing it. And so, you know, we thought, wow, four kids whose stories by themselves could be documentaries. But, you know, it turned out well because we really just kept it to their voices. I thought it was important not to have any narration. A lot of times, you know, documentaries, you have narration to help tell the story. But we really wanted just the young voices to tell their stories. And one of the studies that Rory found was peer-to-peer communication is really critical. And, you know, young people are going to listen to other young people, right? They don't want to hear, you know, some older voice talking or whatever. So that's how we decided to tell this documentary, is through those 4 voices.
It's a really effective technique, and they even had the 4 young people who were being interviewed and telling their stories repeat some statistics in a very low-key way, but so that there was some information merged in with their personal narratives that made it even more effective. So it was really great. Tom, Joaquin, one of you like to talk about how you ended up deciding to do your story? You know, without revealing your sources.
So, you know, I think at its core, our story is really about a broken promise. was a settlement between the advocates who had filed the lawsuit and made the case that people living in these homes could live independently on their own, in their own apartments, with services coming to them as needed. And so there was a settlement that called for hundreds of people to move out of these facilities and into their own homes. And what Tom and I did was to look at how that settlement was playing out. And we found that while a number of people were thriving, there were also a lot of people who were not. People disappeared in this system. We found, we found that there was one person who was murdered after she moved out, and all of the persons of interest were also folks that had moved out of these group homes. And just overall, the supports that were promised to these people were inadequate for the most vulnerable among them. And so we went basically door to door to see what the conditions were of some of these folks, and homed in on the stories of a few particular characters that we thought really showed some of the shortcomings of this very ambitious program.
It's part of the joy for me reading that story, which is a really impressive story. It's so well done, is how counterintuitive it is, right? You think you give people autonomy and their lives will be better. So, and the same thing happened with deinstitutionalization. People's lives didn't necessarily get better when institutions closed. So why, is it simply a study reveals lack of funds situation, or does it go beyond that?
Yeah, you would think that, what's the argument here, right? Who's going to argue with people living alone and getting independence is the right to go and and then this court case that gave them the right to do it was a civil rights court case. It was a federal case based on civil rights litigation, legislation. So yeah, it's hard to disagree with the idea and the concept. Yet the problem is the follow through, the support that these people didn't get, and I think that's where the problem
Is it because there's simply not enough funding?
It's not. No, that's the thing. It's really not about the funding in this case. I think we want those kinds of solutions. We sought that. We really looked there. But the truth is, there's billions of dollars in this healthcare system that should be going to these people and providing a superstructure, a safety net that is strong. But the problem really is, just for simplicity's sake, it's bureaucratic and transmitted. It's inherent self-interest of certain bureaucratic agencies that have certain ties to a preordained order, an existing order of the way that things work. And one of those things included Kielty, a connection to these adult homes, this adult home system that existed before, that was the way station of the deinstitutionalization of the state hospitals. So there's a real problem in how a multiplicity of actors who are there to help them were not actually following through with an idea that was fairly revolutionary and interesting and good, but just did not oversee it well. That's basically what happened.
It's pretty ambitious.
It's hugely ambitious. What's interesting to me, was that it's New York City, and we all like to think of New York City as a big sore, a big blemish, a difficult spot that, of course, is going to happen there. But the truth is, what attracted us to this story, too, is how endemic it is across the country. It's not just New York City. So we ended up using New York as the primary example. But it's one of many, and it's actually more interesting than that. It's the leading example. States across the country, communities, activists across the country look at it as a model. And so what was very interesting in the aftermath was the reaction that we saw in the activist community and state, disability agencies across the country, kind of a bit of shock and surprise that this was happening in New York.
Is there a place that really is doing it right?
I mean, it's so difficult to say. One of the things that we ran into throughout the course of our reporting was how do you make that determination. What does success look like? And the state of New York couldn't really figure that out themselves. I mean, their way of measuring success was the person continuing to live in the apartment with as few interventions as possible, meaning that they weren't hospitalized frequently. But there was a lot of people that we saw that sort of met that criteria that were clearly struggling. And just because they didn't appear on a regulator's radar didn't necessarily mean that they were a success story. And from after the publication of this story, I was getting tips from people in North Carolina, which is going through a similar process. And I went to a conference that was held by disability rights advocates that had filed this lawsuit, and I was really surprised to get this invitation because the solution that we held to account was their own. They had advocated for it, and I was thrilled to be invited and to show the film down there. But what we were hearing was that it was a struggle, not just in New York City, but elsewhere as well. And it was really kind of an interesting moment to see this introspection unfold with a mix of defensiveness as well among this group that had fought so hard to make this happen.
Let's talk about the reporting process. I mean, obviously, in both cases, there's phenomenal investigative reporting that went into this, but the human element obviously makes it is as important or more so. So, Marianne, you want to talk a little bit about how you came to choose the 4 kids, 4 students, 4 young people? Young people, we'll land on young people, who you profiled?
Well, again, I'm giving credit to Rory Linnane, who, through her reporting, met each one of the 4 and told us about them and said, I think they're quite articulate, and I think they're very open about what they've been through, and they really want to share their stories so that other young people realize they're not alone in their struggles. So we really relied heavily on Rory to provide these 4 young people to us, and it wasn't until we read about their stories, she provided background for us because, again, we had not met them. And the first time when we conducted our main interviews, it was the first time we actually met them face to face. And they were what Rory said they were. They were very, they're kids, and they're going to school and they're playing volleyball or whatever they're doing. And, they were, I think, comfortable with the interview. We had Rory actually conduct the main interviews for the documentary because we felt that she has already created a relationship with them, and we wanted them to be as comfortable as possible talking about a very serious subject matter. And so we think that was successful. That worked out well.
What was interesting to me is that you all have to watch the documentary and read the story, but there are 4 main characters, and each one, it's almost like there are 4 sub-stories to the main story, which is about suicide, right? You have someone who's transgender, someone who's on the autism spectrum, someone who's been through the foster care system, and the 4th young
bullying,
woman
heavy
was
bullied.
Yeah. So, and I thought that was just remarkable how much you were able to cover in that way, and that there were these layers. But I did wonder about the idea of people who have suicidal ideation, who have depression and anxiety, and can't give you a reason, can't say it's because I've been bullied, it's because I'm going through these issues, related to gender. Did you think about that?
We knew that these 4 were willing to talk about what they went through, and 3 out of the 4 had family support. The oldest girl, who went through the juvenile justice system, had some family early on, but pretty much was left on her own. So, we knew pretty much that they were willing to share their stories, but
Just think, how would you even, I mean, did you talk about that in the process of putting it together, how you would profile someone who doesn't have an issue attached to their mental health struggles?
well, what we did talk about was we didn't want this to just be Barrett's story, Alex's story, TJ's story, Raina's story, like chapters of their, we really wanted it to weave together, because they all, while they had some differences, they all had similarities. Because a lot of it started when, they were young, and they all had suicidal ideations to one extreme or another. And so we really wanted to blend a story as opposed to, like I said, individual things. So, we really didn't have any issues with them not sharing, and because, again, with Rory's reporting and the background that she provided, she knew that they were going to be willing to share. Are there young people who aren't so candid and are maybe hesitant? One of the reasons for the documentary is that we're hoping that more young people will feel comfortable talking to, even if you, as it says in the documentary, even if you talk to a friend or a parent or a neighbor or a teacher, a coach, somebody, just talk to somebody. And so for those young people who are hesitant, we're hoping, and we've seen this documentary have that kind of impact, that, I was hesitant to say something, but now that I hear, you tell your stories, I want to tell mine. And we did a follow-up for those of you who've seen the documentary, if you haven't, MilwaukeePBS.org/Kids in Crisis, it's all there. There are two young women towards the end of the documentary. We had the four of them go to a high school, and it was kind of a peer outreach planned event. And we actually weren't sure we were going to go because we weren't sure all four of them were going to be there. But we decided we're going to go, and sure enough, all four of our subjects turned up to be present at this event. And what we experienced and what you see in the documentary was not planned, but it became a very powerful moment. And the impact certainly was there. And now we told a follow-up story to what we saw at the school.
Yeah, that was an amazing part. Tom, can you talk a little bit about the reporting process in terms of interviewing people with serious mental illness who maybe aren't that interested in talking? I think as journalists, we talk about this a lot when we're talking about journalism that involves disability, that often we don't want to say the wrong thing, we don't want to offend somebody, we don't want to invade their privacy, we don't want to use the wrong terminology. How did that kind of come into play as you were preparing to talk to this population?
Well, I mean, I think that what everybody who's doing reporting and journalism should really understand is that everybody, whether they have a good story, whether it's a great story, I don't know. You never really quite know until you start scratching the surface. But everybody wants to talk, and I think that there's a supposition or a belief that we have that there's a sensitivity if somebody has, a perceived disability or what we call a disability, that somehow separates them from a community of everybody else, all of us. And that's just horseshit. Everybody is the same and has the equal access and the equality of having speech and experience of life. And they should have the ability and be given the chance to talk about that. So the first thing that we did, I think, was we had a lot of conversations with some very, esteemed colleagues of ours, including Meg Kissinger, who's a renowned mental health care reporter from Milwaukee, actually. And she really gave us this very sage and sound advice, which was you have to give them the right of their voice. You cannot step back. That's the most important thing to do. So if somebody, we were dealing with a lot of people who have lifelong, maybe from adolescence onward, schizophrenia or bipolar. If you don't allow them, if you start with the supposition that that's something that takes them out of equality, the equality of having a voice, and the equality of being able to express an opinion, and the equality of calling problems out that they're experiencing, then you're being prejudicial. And so we shouldn't assume anything about anybody, no matter what the perceived disabilities are. And disability is a construct, by the way. It's not a real thing. It's something that we put on people. So you have to get beyond that and just talk to people as they are and try to scratch the surface, deeply. And so what we were dealing with were people who are some of the most, voiceless in our society because of all these, these biases that we put on that population. Severe mental disability, that's who we were dealing with. And when you put severe mental disability as a tag on somebody, that's a clear indication that they're being marginalized just from that tag. So that was what we were going after. We knew that it was a population that was biased against, had no voice in politics. And it was a great in. When you see a population like that, when you know that nobody's paying attention to them, there's going to be stories there, there's going to be abuses there, and there's going to be rights that need to be wrongs that need to be righted there, That's a long way around to trying to get to what you're saying.
Yeah, so to leave the topic at hand for just a minute, just slightly, what about somebody who literally does not have a voice? Someone, I'm not talking about the people who you were covering, but for example, we had a situation last New Year's Eve in Phoenix. There was a 911 call, and it turned out that a woman who has a seizure disorder and does not communicate in traditional ways, was pregnant, 9 months pregnant, at a care facility in Phoenix, gave birth to a healthy baby boy. How do you tell her story? I mean, how do you, applying what you were just talking about, because you're saying everybody has a voice.
Well, look, I'm
not trying to put you on the spot, but it's something I think about a lot.
I think that, one of the stories that won an award here it seems pretty simple, and you were actually right. You should guys go, take this story and make it local here, but the people who are in wheelchairs going to dinner. We've had that story done many times in New York about how do you navigate the subway system, if you're disabled and you're not, you don't have use of your legs. There are ways to do it, and I'm not sure about the particulars of that story, but it sounds like that's I'm sorry, she literally didn't have a voice. Is that what you're saying?
She can't communicate.
Right. Well, then the story for me is what's the failure of the system that doesn't allow her to communicate.
Absolutely.
That's the story.
Absolutely. But obviously, if it is possible to talk to somebody, and your point is that often it doesn't happen because people are marginalized and we just ignore them, then what do you do to prepare? Like we've got a bunch of students here, so advise them. They're going to go do a story. I've seen him many times. There's a gentleman who sleeps across the street from the Arizona Republic on the street. So you're going to write a story about him.
Okay. Well, I think so. There's a as you develop your gut as a journalist. You're going to understand what to follow and what not to follow. That's a good follow. I would follow the man on the street, and I'd certainly follow the woman who doesn't have a voice. These are interesting stories, because I think what you really have to get to, and I feel like I'm, being pontificating here, but
Forcing you
yeah,
to.
I know. So I think what I always do, and I'm the filmmaker half of this, although we're deeply both, investigative reporters. I focus on the bigger meaning, the broader meanings of an individual's life and story. And that's where it really connects. I think of somebody whose experience is so emblematic of something bigger, that's what you have to go to. And so a story about somebody with a disability or a perceived disability who has been marginalized and has the weight of a society on top of them that they cannot break through. It has to have that kind of particular story that you can write about, a detail about this man, let's say, on the street, perhaps, let's say an opioid crisis that's now manifested right in front of you. Get into that story, the specifics of that story, and widen your lens very quickly and, provide context. So that individual becomes a broad vehicle for storytelling that exemplifies something that's bigger and more important and affects all of us, and it has social worth to it. That's what I would say.
Joaquin, what was something about the story that you didn't expect? I mean, we do so much pre-reporting before we jump into stories. You obviously knew a lot about it, but what was something that you didn't expect?
I mean, there was a lot of things that came up along the process that were unexpected, and I think we really gravitated toward those. I mean, that's really sort of the fun part, is you learn something that you didn't think that you were going to learn, and that turns out to be your story. And this experience was a good example of that, because it all started with a tip about how essentially the state was trying to get out from under the terms of the settlement, and that they were going to, slow down in their movement of people out of these adult homes and into their own apartments. And it all centered around this one very troubled facility out in Coney Island, in the outer stretches of the city. And so I went and spent parts of several weeks out there and wrote about what I observed, which were a lot of complaints among the residents of thievery, of predation, of people outside using dumpsters as bathrooms, eating out of garbage cans. There were 2 people that died in the 3 weeks that I was spending there. The police were a frequent presence. The facility was crumbling. It was not a pleasant place to live, and all of this presumably is happening in plain sight of the regulators, which were doing somewhat routine inspections. And so I wrote about what I saw, and then I continued to dig and visit more of these facilities. And along the way, I came across these sources, who were working in clinics and in other places, who were providing care to some of these folks. And what they were saying was, well, if you think this is bad, you should see how they're doing once they leave, once they go into some of their own apartments. There are people who have been living in this facility for 35 years that were given the very first opportunity to live on their own at age 54, and they're, battling auditory and visual hallucinations as they try and learn how to write a grocery list and go grocery shopping and cook for themselves and pay electric bills and do all these other things. And they come back all the time desperate and lonely, trying to get back into the miserable place that they just left. And so I was sort of operating under the presumption that, well, the independent apartments have to be better than this. Nothing could be worse than these adult homes. And so it took me a while to sort of buy into the idea that maybe it's not what it's made out to be. Just leaving is not necessarily enough. And then we came across, the apartments like this person, Abraham Clemente, who's, right behind me right now, and he was living in absolute squalor and had been for months on end. And so we started to dig into how it was possible that his circumstances got so bad when he was supposed to be in a new and improved level of care. The second thing that I can think of that was really surprising and interesting was the story of Nestor Bunch, who was really the spine of our documentary. And first of all, when we started off looking for him, we had very limited information. We had his initials. In fact, we had the wrong initials. And it wasn't until talking to some of his current, or his peers at the adult home that we figured out exactly what his name was. And but we had heard this story that really seemed to exemplify all of the shortcomings of this program, because he lived in 3 different apartments. He was assaulted at one of them. He was, found dehydrated, nearly frozen to death in front of one of them. And so we began to piece it together. And when we finally found him at a group home, I'll never forget, Tom and I saw this postcard, because, we were talking to him about his family background, and it was really hard for him to sort of piece together the history of it. But he had given us this anecdote about his mother going to the White House and talking to President Clinton. And I didn't believe it. I mean, I thought that this was one of his hallucinations, which he would go into frequently. And he didn't have anyone he could put us in touch with who was a part of his family. But we noticed this Christmas card in his tiny little room in this single room occupancy group home. And it had a return address on it. So we went outside, we called the return address, and it was this incredible woman, Nora Weinerth, who was the best friend of Nora's deceased mother. And she was very, Nestor's deceased mother. And who did I say? Nora's. Anyhow, so as it turned out, Nestor was telling the truth, and she had the documents to prove it. She had pictures of his mother, like shaking hands with Bill and Hillary Clinton, correspondence with Tipper Gore related to mental health care, related to her advocacy for the program that Nestor was now in and suffering greatly in. And that was like, that was a huge surprise to find out that he had that kind of a backstory.
And the result of a lot of really great reporting. Yeah, so we're going to take some questions now. Are you pointing to someone or just to the audience in general? Okay, do we have microphone? Yes, okay. Who has a question?
Because I didn't read your whole thing, I just want to ask about deinstitutionalization and what's the difference, between what we used to call deinstitutionalization and this? To me, it's just part of a spectrum.
This is actually one of my favorite topics, believe it or not. When we were doing this project, actually, Joaquin and I have personal experiences with mental illness in our families. And I mean, that's one of the things I always tell people is to really, go where your passions and experiences are. And I've always been fascinated with this idea of deinstitutionalization. And it came from my brother, who was institutionalized and then deinstitutionalized. So what is deinstitutionalization? In the 1950s, early 60s, it was actually a legislative process to close giant state hospitals, kind of like one flew over the cuckoo's nest like hospitals, primarily because they cost a lot of money, but also because drugs had entered into the frame. There was a lot of psychotropics, antidepressants, antipsychotics that were now available. So when they came up, the government decided we can save a lot of money. So they started this process, legislated by John Kennedy, signed it into law. The last law that he signed last piece of legislation he signed into law before he was assassinated was this bill to deinstitutionalize mental health care in the United States. Big part of that was a huge community superstructure that would act as a safety net. That never happened. And then so what happened consequently over the next 4 or 5 decades, homelessness, criminalization of mental health care. This man across from the newspaper, probably, I'm just guessing, but we've failed miserably. We've deinstitutionalized it. The other part of deinstitutionalization is a concept. It's like, it's when you deinstitutionalize somebody, you're freeing them from institutional care. And so the concept is to give them their humanity back. So when somebody is deinstitutionalized. It's not just physically removing them from a hospital, it's giving them their own sense of space. And fundamentally, that's what this program was about. It was to give people the right of their own sense of choice and dignity and living independently.
Because they were moved from, by and large, people were moved from institutions to adult homes,
Right, so the
correct?
next part of the question, which you're rightly asking, is what's the difference between deinstitutionalization, with a state hospital and an adult home, where Joaquin started the story? Not much. There's not much. In fact, it's worse, because there's no medical care, and there's no oversight, and there's very little regulatory apparatus looking over these things. At least back in the era of state hospitals, you had that. It's not to suggest we should go back to state hospitals.
Hi. I was wondering, what were some of your biggest challenges in making Right to Fail in regards to sort of surrounding the entire healthcare system in America is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA, which is a very recent, was a recent law passed back in 97, I believe, 96, 97. And what were some of the challenges you faced in trying to get around this law? And I guess being able to get the full picture, even when mental institutions or healthcare institutions were being difficult, or people could not consent to releasing their records.
It's a great question. I'm going to jump on it because that's his favorite topic.
So we ran into HIPAA, as it's called, which is a legislation to protect people's health records. I mean, that's an vast oversimplification, but that's a big part of what it's about. And at every turn. And, you know, it was the first thing that any nonprofit agency said. Any one of these agencies that was working with one of the individuals that we were following, whenever we asked questions about their care, they would just say, well, HIPAA, we can't talk about it. We're sorry, but good luck. We can't even tell you where that person lives. We can't even confirm or deny that he's in our care. And so it turned out, it started off as this real barrier, but then we figured it out, and we developed, and it became, in many ways, an asset, because we were able to, work with some of our subjects so that they would sign release forms saying that these institutions were now authorized to release their medical records to us, and that these places were authorized to discuss what was in their medical records and in their medical history with us. And, every facility had a slightly different process for how to do that. And there was sort of a labyrinth of agencies that were associated with each person's care. There was one nonprofit that did housing, another one that did social services, another one that provided therapy, another one that provided help with transportation or a personal aid. And each of them would have kind of a slightly different process, and each of them would start with a lot of skepticism that we were, in fact, entitled to these records. But once these folks, signed over their records to us, and sometimes we would have to take them to a notary so that it was, official, we went and did that. Where it got really challenging was in the cases where some of these patients had died. And we had never met them, because by the time we started our reporting, they were already deceased. And so we would have to find their relatives who would then go through this process with us. And in some cases, these agencies would accept the forms just because somebody was a relative of theirs. And in other cases, we would have to go through a process by which that relative would become the administrator of that person's estate, which was a proceeding that we had to go through in surrogate court, meaning that, and we had some really dedicated associate producers that helped us with this, who physically went to the courthouse with these relatives so that they could go through this procedure, become certified administrators of the estate, sign these HIPAA forms over to us, and then we would start the process with that institution and get them to give our records. So it was easy.
It took no time, right?
But your question, I don't know, the most important point here is that HIPAA is a very good idea, societally, socially, it's a good thing. Privacy is a good thing. Yet, institutions in our world, in the world of journalism and investigative reporting, use it against us all the time. And so you have to be innovative and just push hard and find ways around it. Do it ethically, always do it ethically. But there's a vast trove of information in people's medical records, huge amounts of information, lots of stories there. So try to work around HIPAA when you can. Always do it legally and ethically, though.
So quick question, though. Quick follow-on. What's easier to deal with, FOIA or HIPAA?
Yeah, that's funny. I was just telling somebody that it was much easier to get people's medical records that had serious mental illness, schizophrenia, et cetera, than it was to get records out of the New York State government. I mean, time and again.
Through FOIL, yeah.
Yeah, FOIA.
They toss it away.
Okay, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, thank you. Name's Ro, student here. I just want to say thank you guys for sharing your stories. Sounds like it kind of sucks. It's part of the phrase. I just wanted to know, what is the sour taste that this reporting left? Like that one piece where it didn't help you sleep at night, and because I'm always interested to see how journalists overcome and keep doing what they're doing, and kind of that silver lining that it's going to allow you guys to do the next big thing. That was it. Thanks.
I think for us, I don't know if I ever had one of those kept me up all night, but we were very cautious about presenting their stories about suicide and suicidal ideations, and again, it goes back to reporting that and conveying that ethically and in a way where you're not detailing what they did or what they tried to do, but just let them talk a little bit about, yes, I had these ideations, but as one of the subjects, Barrett, said, I didn't follow through because I knew that I would be giving in to the bullies, and they would win. And so we just had to be really careful with that. And, these are young people, and they're talking about, Alex wrote a goodbye note when he was 7 years old. I mean, that really struck me when I not only read about it, but when he said it and he showed us the note. We asked him if he still had the note. And it's heartbreaking, when you see this 7-year-old in his little, handwriting, writing a note to his mom. I mean, that was the closest, I think. I think the silver lining is the impact and that it's making a difference of what we did. Both in Wisconsin, we were invited to the state capitol, and it's having an impact on a committee task force that recommended some changes. And 3 of those changes are a result of our documentary that have to do with schools and young people. And so you feel good about that, that you did the right thing. And then just seeing other young people responding and schools responding and doing positive things, whether it's, adding some kind of change in the school or showing this and having a discussion, or, kids coming forward and talking to somebody about it because they know they're not alone.
And Tom and Joaquin, you also you had an impact, correct?
Yeah, so the day we actually timed the publication of the story so that it appeared on the front page of the New York Times. So try that if you can. On the day that there was a hearing in federal court on the case. So we knew that it was going to have the attention of everybody in the courtroom. And the judge who presided over the case immediately that day called for an independent investigation that was in many respects based on what we had discovered in our reporting, and by this monitor who had been installed to look for problems in the transition, and that report backed up a lot of what we found. And as a result of that report, funding had increased and services for these folks had increased as well. So, that was the point from the very beginning, was to try to create a positive impact on the lives of people who really deserve it.
I can't think of a better place to stop, and Kristen's going to get the hook and drag me off if I go any longer. So congratulations to all three of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.